Come on, every time I click the mouse. All right. I think I'm ready to go now. So potentially we will wrap this chapter up today. That's what I want. I thought should we take a vote, but I don't think we want to vote on that because I think I know the answer. So I posted all of your packback stuff is posted into Moodle now. You should be able to see that. It was based off of percent completion. So if you missed one or two of them, your scores are a little lower. If you did none of them, well, you should expect a 0. And there you go. So overall, you should right now be able to look on Moodle and see all of your stuff. And I believe it should be out of 475 points. That's what you should see, but that's not accurate. So you should take whatever your total score is and divide that by 400. That's where you stand. The final will be on there. It's worth another 125 points. So the overall course total is 500, but it will look on Moodle like it's 600. Yes?
Do our lab grades go into the class grades?
They sure do not. They are completely separate. All right. So that what you have in lab and what you have in lecture, 2 separate grades, 2 separate things. It's not averaged together. All right. With that said, one more housekeeping tidbit. The end of the semester evaluation should be available to all of you on Moodle. Lecture and lab are separate. Please log on there and do the evaluations. Your TAs will get notification about that stuff. I don't see lab details. I only see lecture stuff. All right. So please log on and do that stuff. It closes Sunday night or Monday morning at 7 a.m. I think is when it closes. Yes.
I know our lab section had 2 different TAs. Like we had one
and then another.
Yes.
Okay.
There's when you do the evaluation, the second one, they'll have like first TA and then next page.
Okay.
Oh, there's details for both because you've already done it. Okay, so you get to evaluate 2 of them. Only a couple of labs get that opportunity. Everybody else was in the same boat throughout, which I think is good. Questions or concerns? Okay, so if you've got issues grading or anything like that, figuring out scores, just let me know. I'll be happy to help you with that. But I think it should be pretty straightforward. I left you guys off Monday with, we're still thinking some bacteria before we shift gears and move into some other organisms. So some bacteria culprits for infections, meningitis, and others. Listeria monocytogenes, as we look at this, it's infecting cells. And my gut tells me as we're looking at this, it's probably intestinal cells that we're looking at. Looks like some macrovilli up at the top, and how it's able to get in. It does have potentials for those issues. It's also a great one for some GI issues as well. All right. And I think this is really pretty impressive. The figure kind of walks us through what's happening over here in the process of infection. So our listeria comes in contact with a host cell, intestinal cell, and as it makes contact, our cell phagocytizes it, invaginates around the bacterium and puts it into a little vesicle, a phagocytome. The idea would be for that phagocytome to fuse with a lysosome and then to destroy it, but that's not what happens. All right. So it basically busts out of the phagocytome, it replicates, it picks up some actin through into the green cell, the host cell, all right? Some actin within there, and then it in turn is going to progress through from one cell to the next. It protrudes into the next cell, and as it does this, you can see here, now it's kind of a double vesicle, as we've got membrane from the green guy and membrane from the blue one as we merge in. And the same thing happens as we move through. The protrusion isn't 100% a phagocytome, but it's pretty much the same sort of an idea. And as it gets in there, it degrades that, replicates, and 7 basically is a repeat of this, and we just keep progressing. So multiple cells, once the first one is infected, it basically is kind of just a chain reaction as it moves from one cell into the next. Our next, moving over, our next one, we've got a couple of images. So individual and then stain over here. This is an acid-fast stain. We've seen a little bit of this early on in the semester when we were talking about different staining techniques. And really the idea there, we were thinking more about tuberculosis. Mycobacterium leprae is a cousin of tuberculosis. And as we see down here, this is a disease that pretty much for forever has been known as leprosy. Hansen was the physician that identified and described all of these things. And the big push is really to move away from talking about leprosy and the picture that that paints into everyone's mind, and maybe making it a little more friendly to think about, all right? It is something that still happens. There are still issues with people infected with Hansen's disease. It's pretty rare, right? Depends on where you're at, all right? If we're thinking United States, pretty rare occurrence, all right? So there are all sorts of potentials and details with this, with the bacterium. Part of it with its mycolic acid in the cell wall that lends to its acid-fast staining, makes it kind of slow to progress and grow, to proliferate. There are numerous things that are occurring, and we can see images here on the individual's nose with some of the organism that's gone in and caused some necrotic tissue as we're looking at this around the nostril. There are multiple details with this. There's nerve damage that occurs. You know, they describe things like your body parts are sloughing off and things like that. That's not 100% accurate with all of those details. And that in turn is kind of why we're like, we should move away from leprosy and some of the misconceptions about that, all right? So moving forward. So I was on my game, and before I got in here, I quickly deleted and posted new tables into the PowerPoint. So it's I don't have to bounce back and forth. So here's a list of some bacterial infections. A few of them we've hit on and seen some images. These are targeting the nervous system. So we've got top of the list botulism, bottom of the list tetanus, cousins as well, all right? Both Clostridium species, and a smattering in between of others. So there are differences with these two, not exactly opposites, but sort of, as far as how some of the types of paralysis are occurring. And we discussed a little bit of that, all right? So all sorts of potentials as we move through here. I'm not going to spout off all of these details so that we can finish, right? I know that's what we truly want. So shifting over to some viral culprits, there are a handful within here. And here's some encephalitis, equine encephalitis. But back to the meningitis, initially we talked about cases presenting with meningitis. The first thing we think of is bacterial meningitis, and we start treating with antimicrobials with that in mind. The hopes would be that it's something different, maybe viral, and not the potential fatal consequences that you might see with that. So shifting into some viral stuff, all right? There are a handful of different things we want to think about, and some of these are relatively new on the radar when we think about some of these viral culprits, not equine encephalitis. That's something that we have known about for a super long time. But Zika, that you'll see here in a second, is something that, at least here, relatively new on the radar, all right? So a couple of images as we're looking at it. So this first bit, the equine encephalitis virus is transmitted by mosquitoes, and here's a image, electron micrograph of salivary gland, and all of the red stuff within here are the viral particles, the equine encephalitis. And then here is a scan of an individual who has equine encephalitis, showing some of the issues with that. So here is the Zika and another micrograph, and then some of the issues, all right? This was, probably maybe 6 or 7 years back. I can't remember exactly when we first started thinking about Zika, not too far back. And we had there was a microbiologist, virologist, really, that came to campus and gave a seminar and was talking about some of this and some other viral culprits that cause all sorts of encephalitis. But Zika was some of her main stuff that she was talking about, and potentials where it's like kind of like thinking here with West Nile virus. When it first showed up, this was something that our population was naive. We've never seen it, we've never dealt with it, and so the impacts were considerably more than thinking around the Nile, where it's really described more of a childhood illness, all right? Zika is something that's probably a similar kind of idea, thinking a little bit about that, where in some areas it's been present for a considerable amount of time, and then moving into naive populations, we see bigger impacts with it being pretty contagious as these mosquitoes are infecting all sorts of people. The issues with this, not that just being a normal individual, you can't have some complications, but it's women that are pregnant that see the biggest complications and issues as the virus infects that child, and they are with microcephaly. There are numerous other issues with that as well, but the shrunken head is definitely a huge issue that we have recognized with this virus. So there are numerous things, and it's still definitely an issue, but something that's sort of dropped off the radar, really, and maybe we could blame pandemic for that. We focused all of our attentions about that and not really thinking about other things. There are all sorts of other things that are still happening, folks. It's just where our attentions are truly focused, all right? So there are other potentials besides mosquitoes. There has been some sexual transmission with this, so there's numerous opportunities to think about some possibilities with that. As we started this chapter, we saw the dog that we might imagine could have been rabid. Here's an image of the virus. So a couple of the rabies virus, call them rhabdovirus. They're bullet shaped. And, you know, I think maybe that could be the bullet that does you in if you are careful with that, right? Here, shifting over to polio. There are numerous things with polio where we have thought about in passing previous chapters, GI issue, and then also think about central nervous system as well. There can be some serious issues with paralysis. Iron lung is what we're looking at over here, that not everybody needed this, but there were definitely a number of people that ended up being sequestered away into the iron lung just so that they could breathe. So polio, here's some image of the virus, poliovirus. And there were a couple of virologists that developed some vaccines, all right? Sabin and Salk coming up with two different techniques to vaccinate. And I can't remember if I've got another image with this. Nope. So one vaccine is an oral vaccine. That vaccine is an attenuated form, and the other is an injection where it has been killed, if you will. Inactivated is better to say than killed, because how do you kill something that you don't describe as being alive, right? But we oftentimes talk about these vaccines as killed. Really, it's inactivated. That virus isn't capable of transmitting any sort of infection. Whereas the attenuated, the oral form, that attenuated form does have a potential to maybe back mutate, to revert, to cause potential issues. And there were some instances of individuals taking that vaccine that were ultimately able to spread polio to others, right? So kind of just little tidbit. This next one, I feel like we've shown these prion image before. This was back chapter 5, I think, when we talked about some virus. I think we showed polio there. And we also talked about some of these other things, not virus, all right? So prions are proteins, and I'm pretty sure we showed this exact figure many chapters ago, all right? So within your brain, you've got the green guys, the endogenous prion proteins that have the proper folding, all right? As your protein, as the messenger RNA is read and you build your proteins, you've got a linear and then a secondary and a tertiary form. It all folds up and becomes three-dimensional. And as a protein gets altered or denatured, how it was folded changes, all right? Its shape is altered, all right? So the green guys are folded up properly, all right? And then there are handfuls of different potentials. It could be a spontaneous mutation. It could be a mutant that comes in contact with the normal one, whatever it is. Once you get the red ones that are misshapen, they catalyze the conversion of the green guys to red guys. So you get a spontaneous situation that alters it, or inoculation, coming in contact with tissues that were already altered, sets the stage as well. And then all of these other proteins that were folded proper convert to the bad ones, all right? And there are handfuls of different prion diseases. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is one we think about with humans. Mad cow, the bovine spongiform encephalopathies, or BSE, we think about in cattle, all right? But others, scrapie, and a handful of other ones fit into that category as well. So here's this, Creutzfeldt-Jakob. Transmissible spongiform encephalopathies is the TSEs, all right? So all prions, all misshapen or misfolded proteins, all right? And numerous impacts with that. The arboviral encephalitis, because I skipped them, a whole handful of encephalitis: Eastern equine, Western equine, St. Louis, West Nile, and Japanese equine encephalitis, numerous ones that horses serve as really reservoirs for that, but we have the potentials to become infected as well. Just because it says horse doesn't mean we can't get it. So there's all sorts of potentials from mild to fatal complications with that. Polio, we just saw an image with rabies, the viral meningitis, like I said, as we were shifting into the viral bits, we focus on the bacterial, but the hopes are it's something else, right? So there's a handful of different viral culprits that could cause meningitis. Herpes 1 or 2, varicella, mumps, influenza, and measles virus all have the potentials to cause meningitis. We typically think about them doing other things, right? But the opportunity is there. And then Zika, that we showed with the, the shrunken head and other potentials. So fever and rash, conjunctivitis, but really the biggest issue would be the unborn child. All right, shifting over, Cryptococcus neoformans is a yeast. And as we look at these guys, oftentimes they are used, at least textbook stuff, used to show images of capsules, because the Cryptococcus produces thick, beautiful, if you're a microbiologist, beautiful capsules, right? And they truly, when you negative stain them, are very prominent, easy to see. And so talking, just not thinking about disease stuff, just talking about capsule production, usually you see some of these guys shown because it's so good, all right? So these yeast cells, we've got a big, thick cell wall, chitinous cell wall. They are nucleated cells. We're not staining them up to see any of that stuff, all right? And then the capsule, all right, that's produced. So there should be so many pictures, so many details, but we've already seen a little bit of some of these, all right? We've talked about a handful of them. I think we've really talked about all of them. Aspergillosis, Aspergillus fumigatus, can cause meningitis. All of these have potentials for meningitis. Typically, we're thinking about them impacting you elsewhere, all right? These are kind of some oddball, rare occurrences. And with that said, when we start thinking about something like maybe meningitis and bacterial stuff gets ruled out, we start thinking the next thing on the radar should be viral, because that's usually where you turn next. And if we rule that out, you better start thinking fungus, right? And, sometimes maybe we should put the brakes on, and maybe we should think fungus a little more often, all right? It's hard to say, all right? Maybe depends on where you're at that might lend to thinking about some of those details. Like if you're in an area where, valley fever is endemic, maybe that should be a little more on your radar than initially going right to the virus after it's not bacterial, all right? So just saying, all right? So Aspergillus is a potential, and we see here it's a dissemination from a respiratory tract infection. So the fungus we mentioned before, potentially causing a fungus ball within the lungs, and then the possibility of it moving elsewhere, but being, a fungemia as it circulates through the blood, and then maybe making its way up into the brain. Candida albicans, candidiasis also can cause meningitis, and it's moving either oropharynx or urogenital, and within the circulation to the brain. Coccidioidomycosis, Coccidioides immitis, one that's really pretty rare when we think about this. It is a dimorphic fungus. We've talked about that as well. About 1% of infections with Coccidioides will present with meningitis. So fortunately not seeing a majority of these cases going that route. It's another one that disseminates from the respiratory tract. Cryptococcus, the one we just saw with the beautiful capsule layers can form meningitis, also some granulomas within the brain as we try to wall them off. This is something that's an inhalation situation. And we think about crypto being common in like bird feces. Pigeons are good ones for it, but it doesn't have to just be pigeons, all right? But that definitely sets the stage for possibly coming in contact with it, all right? And maybe more of a compromised immune status lends to it truly taking hold in those circumstances, all right? Histoplasmosis, another dimorphic fungus, Histoplasma capsulatum. It also can form some granulomas. And another one that disseminates from the respiratory tract. Mucormycosis rhizopus, common bread mold, can form some brain abscess, and it's transmitted through the nasopharynx. A little bit disturbing. And another one that depleted immune response, compromised situations set the stage for it to truly cause these effects. And really, we might think about that with a lot of these that lends to its opportunity to progress that way, all right? Because obviously thrush or a vaginal yeast infection typically stays in those locations, and you don't think much more about it than that, all right? Other than, holy crap, I want to get rid of this immediately, right? But you're not really thinking meningitis typically, all right? Oh man. Now I was like, you know, we could finish this today. And then I shift to Naegleria and I'm like, but hold on, folks. Could I not talk about some brain-eating amoebas for a whole stinking hour? You better believe it, but I won't do that to you, all right? Naegleria fowleri is awesome, I think, all right? There are numerous things. It lives as an amoeba, as we see up here, and this is from brain tissue, I'm assuming autopsy. Almost always infections with Naegleria are diagnosed at autopsy, all right? It's not diagnosed beforehand and then you die, and then we try to figure out what the hell killed this kid, right? Because oftentimes it's little kids that get impacted with this, all right? Naegleria likes warm bodies of water. It doesn't have to be hot pools, but it likes warm water, all right? Ponds and lakes in the middle of summer can be potentials. Swimming pools in southern states, more likely. You almost always, every summer now, it seems like you hear some stuff about brain-eating amoeba, all right? And if you haven't, you better start looking at some news, right? There are other opportunities. It can survive chlorination, so hot water tanks potentially could be a possibility for these organisms to be found. People have contracted this by flushing their sinuses as they have got hot water just out of the tap. Little neti pot, flush their sinus out because they got a head cold, and then they wind up dead. Issues, right? So the amoeba or the flagellated form, these guys are weird, all right? Nice environment, ample nutrients, we see the amoeba. If we're in this pond and the nutrients are starting to deplete, it will shift from the amoeboid form to a flagellated form, giving it an opportunity to move much more rapidly, to swim to a new location, which hopefully has better nutrients. And we can flip back to the amoeboid form. It does not have to infect us to complete its life cycle, all right? This is more of an accidental parasite. Wrong place at the wrong time, right? So you get into the water and the kicker is it's got to go up your nose. Drinking some of the water, not that you should be drinking swimming pool water, all right? But the the organism needs to go up the nose in order for it to complete its migration into the brain, all right? So the amoeboid or flagellated form makes its way up the nose. It travels along the nerves into the brain, and in turn converts into the amoeboid form and starts feeding on tissues. Typically, after water has gone up your nose, you start feeling ill effects, maybe the next morning. Within a day or two, you've got some severe issues happening. You might initially think, mild headache, you might be coming down with something. You need treatment immediately, all right? And if you don't, which most people don't, because they don't think anything about that, in turn, within 3 or 4 days, it's a fatal consequence, right? And then they figure it out, right, at autopsy. Almost always, it's fatal. There have been just a few cases that have been caught super early, treated with amphotericin B, and I think another drug within there as well, where we have seen recovery, all right? But almost never. Yeah.
So how do you know? Just like-
Well, first off, it's got to go up your nose, right? So like I said, it's more likely young children, maybe young adults, where this is happening. As you get a little bit older and you've jumped into the water a handful of times, you kind of recognize water going up your nose hurts, right? And we try to avoid that, right? You jump in, you may plug your nose, or you get in nice and slow, and you don't let the water, flush right up your nose like that. You just dump. But when you're younger, you're still learning that stuff. And so that's when it's more likely to happen. So issues would be something like that, where your kid jumped off the houseboat into the lake and water went up their nose. The next morning they wake up and they've got a severe headache. You should know, right? We'd better go see a doctor immediately. And if you're thinking, oh, maybe they're just coming down with something, maybe they are, right? Maybe it's something that's fatal, right? So kind of depends. There are others that like cooler water, right? Acanthamoeba is another one, and we talked about it with the eye stuff, contact lenses and things like that. But it also can cause meningitis. It's more of a granulomatous. PAM is primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, and the other one is a granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. A little bit different, all right? Still bad news, all right? Balmuthia also causes granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. So our body tries to form the granulomas around these amoebas, try to kind of calcify them up, if you will. Balmuthia is an amoeba that is more of a soil dweller, that's really more of the habitat where you would see it, all right? And so it can get kind of aerosolized, brought up and inhaled. It's more of an issue if your immune response is compromised. Otherwise, it's something that your body doesn't really let it take hold, all right? Not typically, all right? Another one that can be, if it's able to get in there, almost always a fatal infection as well, all right? Almost always. We've seen some of these trypanosomes already as well. Trypanosoma brucei, really, and for all purposes in here, we're just going to leave it at this, but there are really 3 Trypanosoma brucei culprits that if we looked at them microscopically, you couldn't tell them apart, but they are different, right? There are 2 of them, and we give them subspecies status, right? Trypanosoma brucei infects livestock, all right? Gambiensiae and Rhodesiensiae are the two that infect people, all right? So kind of just depends. For our purposes in here, we'll just leave it at this, all right? They cause some African sleeping sickness is the common name for what's happening with this trypanosomiasis. As this happens in the livestock, it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of a similar idea. We call that Nagana, but it's similar sorts of issues, all right, with the impact. And it has huge issues in Africa, as the name implies. Massive areas of Africa where we think about maybe prime real estate for things like livestock. And they get infected and become very emaciated. They starve to death. There's huge impacts on them and in turn on us. The opposite with those plaguing us, the two different types with this, the sleeping sickness is more of a chronic form with that, and it is one that lasts longer within you. The other one is more of an acute instance. You're basically dead before you get any neurological conditions, all right? We're not gonna worry about that or get bogged down with hashing out the details of the two. We'll just say they cause sleeping sickness, all right? But really, there are some variations with that, all right? And all sorts of issues as we think about some of that. And we'll see some details in the table here in just a second. Toxoplasma gondii, we talked about this a little bit before with the cats and the potential for it to have central nervous system involvement. Here we can see this cyst. This is in a mouse, but it could be in us as well. And as these things are occurring, like in the mouse, as I mentioned before, there's potential for some behavioral shifts, making that mouse all of a sudden love the cat, right? This cyst is full of parasites within it. And if the cat decides that that mouse is going to get ingested, there you go, all right? This next image is a human brain, and we've got a bunch of little bits. We're pointing to a few. This is neurocysticercosis. So we've got pork worm that we mentioned these guys before when we were talking GI tract stuff, right? And there are issues with pork worms. The other worms stay localized. You get the adult worm in your GI tract, the eggs are released, they infect somebody else, you eat poorly cooked meat, you get infected. But with the pigs, there are a couple of issues, and we get the adult stage worm in our intestines, but through poor hygiene, the eggs can be ingested, and now we serve as an intermediary host as well. So the cysts will form within the musculature typically, but the potential for brain involvement is there. And so the neurocysticercosis is where these parasites have made their way up into the brain, forming these cysts and potentially fatal consequences with this, right? So both images, we can see some of that stuff. The amoebic encephalitis, the granulomatous amoebic encephalitis, I said acanthamoeba, and then we saw the Balmuthia. Both of these amoeboid forms cause, within the brain, cause it the opportunity to try to wall it off, all right? With the primary amoebic down below, you don't see a granulomatous reaction because there's not enough time, all right? I mean, days after being infected, right, where it gets you. Up here, it's more slow, right? But also, it's bad news, but it's slower to progress, all right? So Here we can see with this, the acanthamoeba and Balmuthia, inflammation, lesions, almost always fatal. Freshwater amoeba with our acanthamoeba. The Balmuthia may be that as well, but it's definitely more of a soil situation. At least I'm pretty sure that's the case. And there are a handful of azoles that can be possibly be effective with that. So the human trypanosomiasis or African sleeping sickness, here are the subspecies that I was describing a second ago, all right? So all of them, all right, the infecting the livestock or any of them infecting us, they're all transmitted by the tsetse fly. This again through the saliva as it's feeding on us like a mosquito would be doing. It inoculates us with these trypanosomes, and it's a specific stage of the trypanosome in the fly that's infective to us. It's a specific stage of the trypanosome within us that's infective to the fly. If it taps into us and eats the wrong stage, it doesn't progress in the fly. And if the fly happens to inoculate us with the wrong stage, which is pretty stinking rare, but if it happens to do that, it's also not going to progress, right? There's multiple steps of development in each host that need to happen in order for the life cycle to continue, all right? Which is kind of impressive. So dependent upon where the fly has fed, typically you get a little chancre that shows up, ulceration, more than just a little bug bite. Winter bottom sign is a potential where your lymph nodes on the back of your neck can get very enlarged and swollen, all right? Possibly your first hint, right? Fevers, lethargy, insomnia. And this, as we're moving into this bit, is more with the one that actually is causing the true sleeping sickness, right? Neurocysticercosis, the pork tapeworm, Taenius solium, the Trichinella spiralis, the pork nematode, the roundworm, also can cause issues like that, right? But it's not on, it should be. So cysts, epilepsy is a potential. They speculate a large amount of occurrences of epilepsy could be the result of neurocysticercosis, which I think is interesting. Contamination issues with that. There are some treatments with this. The other one, our roundworm, not, right? As we think about those potentials, there is no treatment, right? Neurotoxoplasmosis, again, potentials with this. It really kind of depends on the circumstances, but it may go up into the brain, and that in turn sets the stage for all sorts of issues with that. Maybe crazy cat lover, right? And our Naegleria down below. Perfect. All right, couple minutes to spare. Questions, comments, or concerns? Anybody tuning in from home with questions? This is the last lecture. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a great summer. Good luck on all of your finals. That should be first. And then enjoy your summer. Also, quickly, one little tidbit, I should mention this. There is a microbiology club. This club has been relatively inactive this year, partially blamed on pandemic, partially blamed on sheer laziness, and part of that's my fault. I am the faculty advisor of that club. I just want to throw this out here. Blanket invitation. If you are interested, the Microbiology Club has set up a field trip to tour Jim Dandy's brewery tomorrow at 3 p.m. Right? during the tour. It's just simply looking at the process of making beer, fermentation, seeing kind of the behind the scenes stuff. If you are interested in the consumption of that, well, you have to do that on your own time. But I could potentially help you with that as well. So if you're interested, tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we will take a tour of Bandy's. Is it mandatory to be in class for the final? Heck no, I expect to not see you in class because I won't be here. The final will be posted onto Moodle soon, and it will be open at least probably soon, like tomorrow. It will be open over the weekend until whenever it closes, which I want to say is Wednesday of next week, but I could be wrong. And I'm going to close it at 5 o'clock. I think this final is scheduled to happen 7:30 to 9:30 Wednesday morning of next week, and that's just done. So, I mean, I would be awake, but I don't want to be here at 7:30, all right? And I bet you don't either. So it will be open for maybe a little bit bigger window of time than the other exams. There you go. Maybe a short answer question, probably quite a bit of matching thinking table stuff is what we're thinking about. Good. Other questions or chats? Okay, guys, have a great day.